If you've already watched some of my other videos, you may have already heard me say this. I love the mini retro systems. Of course, I'm being specific to those that were released by the companies that own the rights to the original hardware and games. I don't buy or use the cheap knockoffs that have flooded the market in the last few years. The mini or classic consoles are a great way of accessing a bunch of games for an old console at a decent price. In this video, I'm going to review the 5 mini consoles in my collection. I will give the pros and cons of each, as well as give a rating to each one out of 10. There are 2 consoles that I will not be reviewing today. They are the Amiga Mini and the TurboGrafx 16 Mini. I live in Canada and both were very difficult to access here. So let's get into the list. I'm going to begin with the one that started the trend. The NES Classic Edition was released in 2016 with a re-release in 2018. However, true to most Nintendo releases, the company did not produce enough to cover the demand. It was a bit of a challenge to pick one up. The pros for the NES Classic include, it came with 30 games. Many of the games are iconic to the NES, beginning of big franchises like Zelda, Castlevania, Mario, and Metroid. The controller is indistinguishable from the original hardware, except for one small detail. The NES Classic did have some cons though. Only one controller was included, but you could purchase a second one. The cord length of the controllers was extremely short. You really needed to purchase an extension here, and they cost about $10, but still, they should have just made the cord longer. You had to press the reset button on the console to get to the game selection screen, and some of the games are filler, namely things like Ice Climber, Balloon Fight, Donkey Kong, and Pac-Man. Overall though, I look at the NES Classic as a good first attempt. Despite the obvious areas for improvement, I still give this a 7 out of 10. The next mini console I want to discuss is the C64 Mini. When I was a kid, our family had a Nintendo Entertainment System, but my neighbors had a Commodore 64. I got the Commodore 64 Mini because it did have some nostalgic appeal to me. Some of the pros for this system are as follows. It comes with 64 games included. That is more than any of the other consoles reviewed in this list. You can add additional games to this. This firmware includes a feature that once you do an update from the official website, you can add any game for the Commodore 64 to this mini system. It's absolutely amazing. You can access the games actually from the controller. A button on the controller takes you back to the game select screen. This is a big feature that a lot of these other mini systems seem to have missed. However, the C64 doesn't lend itself well to a mini console, as can be seen when reviewing its cons. The games really lack any recognizable titles unless you played the C64 in your youth. There's no franchises here, there's no beginnings of Zelda or Mario or what have you. It's just, they're games that were on the C64 and they sort of stayed on the C64. Lots of games require a keyboard. For this, they included a virtual keyboard that just doesn't cut it. You can add your own, but it is cumbersome, especially when you consider there's only 2 ports for USB, and if you add games to it, you have to have it on the thumb drive, so your controller, your joystick, goes on one of those USB ports, your additional games go in the other port. If you want to play the additional games with a keyboard and the joystick, both, well, too bad. You're going to have to come up with some kind of an extension, and maybe that would work, but really, it doesn't come packed in. So really, this system doesn't really lend itself that well to the Mini. But I still give it a 6 out of 10, because it does come with 64 games, and if you are somebody who had a Commodore 64 when they were growing up, boy, this would be very nostalgic for you, and you would have a lot of fun with it. Nintendo's second classic console made some improvements over their first attempt. The Super Nintendo Entertainment System Classic trimmed down the number of games offered, but still came out as the better console. Let's go over some of the pros. It's all killer, no filler as far as games go. All the games are iconic games from the system, whether you're talking about Star Fox, Zelda, Metroid, Mario, what have you. Even the Kirby games, they're all iconic games from the system. They're all big sellers for the system. They packed in 2 controllers this time, which is a big plus from the original Nintendo. And the controllers, once again, feel authentic when you're holding them in your hands. So it is a step up. The cons for it, though, the controller length for the controllers is still a bit short. It's longer than the NES Classic. It's still a bit short, though. But if you did buy an extension cable for the NES Classic system, you can use it for the SNES Classic system. You have to use the reset button again on the console to access the game selection screen. I don't know why they didn't put a button on the controller, or even some combination of buttons on the controller. You can hack the system and put this in, but it just should have been included. You shouldn't have to get up off your lazy ass every time to change the game that you're playing. The other con I have, and this goes 2 ways. 20% of the games on the system are RPGs. If you don't like RPGs, this may not be the console for you. If you do like RPGs, this would be a great mini console for you. Dive right in. But still, I can't help but give this overall an 8 out of 10. They did a great job with this one. It's not my personal favorite one, but just the quality of it, the games that were included, I can't help but give it a good scoring. The next console on my list really, really hurts. As a Sony fanboy, I was hoping for big things when the PlayStation Classic was announced. Sony could have learned the lessons that came from before, but they didn't. In fact, they made all kinds of new mistakes with this one. And it really does hurt. And I did a whole video on adding new games to this system just because I couldn't justify just keeping it as is. But since I couldn't come up with any pros, let's skip right to the PlayStation Classic cons. Only 5 or 6 games are worth playing. There are so many good titles for the PlayStation, and I have no idea why Sony couldn't pack this mini console with hits. Beyond that, I also don't understand why some of the games included are PAL versions of the games, and they're running at different frame rates than the North American versions. It just boggles my mind. The controllers that were included were not DualShock, so you didn't get the analog controllers. That does affect the gameplay on a couple of the games. The system didn't come packed in with a block for your power cable. You had to supply your own. And of course, you couldn't access the game selection menu from the actual controller. Once again, you had to get up and hit the reset button. This thing it could have been so good. Sony could have hit this one out of the park, and they could have added 20 great, absolutely wonderful titles. They could have sold all kinds. Instead, what ended up happening is they were sitting on the shelves until basically companies were offering them at half price or even less just to get them off the shelf, get rid of them, get them out of their warehouse. It's a real disappointment, and I hate to do this because I am such a Sony fanboy, but I am giving the PlayStation Classic a 1 out of 10. You guys really dropped the fucking ball here. So now we go from worst to first. The Sega Genesis Mini was the best system that I've got out of the 5. It learned the lessons from everybody else that came before it, and it learned them well. The pros of the system blow away the competition. First of all, there's 42 games. And of those 42 games, very few can be considered filler. I may not like all 42 games, but at least I can recognize that somebody would like them, and somebody would want them on the system. They were popular enough when the Genesis was out, and they are kind of iconic games. They have everything from Golden Axe to Streets of Rage to Sonic to whatever, Castlevania Bloodlines, Contra, etc. They've got all kinds of iconic games on here, all kinds of great games to play for your Sega Genesis. It comes with 2 controllers with long cords. Wonderful controllers that feel exactly the same as a Genesis controller. And like I said, great cords. On the controller, there is a button, an additional button added. It's like a trigger button that allows you to access the game selection screen from where you're sitting. So you don't have to get up and hit reset every time to get to that game selection screen. This console gives an authentic feel for a Sega Genesis and for a Sega Genesis mini system. There's only one con I can give to this, and that is there's one game on here, Street Fighter II, that requires 6 button controllers. Now, they didn't pack in the 6-button controller, they packed in the 3-button controller. This is a small thing. You could buy a 6-button controller, and I did, but to really play 2-player, you would need 2 of them. I didn't buy 2, I only bought 1 myself. Most people would only buy 1. However, they were a little pricey. They were more than the $10 for the NES one. They were more like $20, $25 each. They're authentic, they're great, they work wonderfully. However, it is an additional cost and really should have been packed in if they were going to include a game on here or a couple games. Maybe there are other games on here that require a 6-button controller, but I know for sure it's Street Fighter II does require it, and it's not included on here. So for that, and that reason alone, I'm not giving the Sega Genesis Mini a perfect score. I'm giving it a 9.5 out of 10. Wonderful system, wonderful console. If I were to buy any of the ones on here, that would be the one in the NES Mini. Now, a little bit on how I rank this. I tried to rank this as unbiased as I could. So when I was a kid, I didn't own a Sega Genesis. I wasn't playing video games when Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo were going head to head. I kind of dropped out of video games for about 5 years, 6 years maybe, from when I stopped playing the Nintendo Entertainment System, and then PlayStation 1 got me back into video games. So I don't have any nostalgia for the Sega Genesis Mini, but I think it is the best system just looking at all the things that comes with it. However, if I were to pick my favorite, it is the Nintendo Entertainment System one, the original one, the first one. Despite its flaws, despite its problems, that one for me holds the most nostalgia out of all of these. The PlayStation Mini could have, if they hadn't have screwed up the game selection so badly, but it does go to the NES. So, what's yours? What mini console do you like the best? Do you have any? Do you like them? Do you think they're junk? Do you think they're great? Personally, I love them. I think they're wonderful systems. I think they fill a hole just for retro gamers, that they can get a whole bunch of games all at once for a great price. But they may not be everybody's cup of tea. So let me know what you think, and let me know what you think of my ratings. Maybe you think my ratings suck. Maybe you think they're spot on. Tell me why. I really would like to know. So leave a comment if you don't mind. Also, I want to thank again all my subscribers. You are very much appreciated. I do appreciate every subscriber. So thank you so much for subscribing. Have a wonderful day. See you in the next video.